Festival 2025. We're starting off really well with neon, proper disruptors, proper people who understand the profound responsibility that we have with the biosphere on the island. I'm going to read like most of what they've written because it's beautiful. The Isle of Man biosphere represents a unique opportunity and a profound responsibility, navigating deeply interconnected human and ecological systems as they shape our biosphere nature. And they foster regenerative decision making. So making the right decisions, and anybody who was here last night for your fantastic lecture, it's all to do with the decisions that we make every day and the impact that that has, and it gives us a profound responsibility. I particularly like, it says, Ali Hodgson, Lucy Chapman and Charlotte Traynor form a collective of island-based regenerative change makers, where is the bit where, to challenge dominant assumptions, foster new narratives, and showcase the impact and opportunities arising from pioneering approaches to our being. So I will just leave it. So Ali, Lucy, Charlotte, have a big presentation.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for coming and listening to our talk. So we are Neon Futures, as you've just heard, and our talk is called Reimagining Our Biosphere, Systemic Tools for a Regenerative Economy in the Isle of Man. So we're going to touch on this gritty subject of economics, but don't worry, we're going to make it fun as well. We might even get a bit interactive, so you have been warned. But before we start, just an important note we wanted to share. We don't feel like we've necessarily got the answers, but we are curious and we want to ask questions. We think that's really important, and we want to start this shift away from this paradigm of problem solving towards creative possibility making. And so that's very much about what we're at. And we really want to share some of the ideas that we see as having value within the biosphere and our economic systems here on the Isle of Man. So a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. We've packed a lot in here, so a bit of a warning, we're going to go quite fast. But a quick overview, we're going to touch on the challenges that we see our traditional economic systems having, the visions and transitions needed to move us towards a more regenerative economy, and then we're going to look at the transformation as well, so some of the tools and the case studies that we're working on or interested in that we think can work with this. And then finally, we want to share just a little bit about why we came together as a collective to form Neon Futures. We are a regenerative design agency and using practical tools and research-driven practice to facilitate regenerative change, and that's what's important to us. So we're going to start with a quick exercise. Please could you put your hand up if you think the economy impacts nature and the environment? Okay, so I'm going to say that's pretty much all of you. Can you put your hand up if you think the economy impacts life in the Isle of Man? Yeah, fantastic. Okay, and do you think the economy impacts your well-being? Okay, so I'm going to say that's pretty universal as well. Okay, hands up if you are an economist. Hey! So, yeah, I mean, hands up, we're not economists, okay, so, but, we really believe in our economy and its influence on life, and I have a feeling looking at all those hands that you guys do too, so that's really important. We believe in asking questions. We see that as something that's incredibly important, and the right questions as well.
So it's clear that the vast majority of us in this room are not economists or consider ourselves expert in the economy. But we've all acknowledged that it affects us, our local environment, and the planet more widely. So why do we think that the economy is this thing that is unattainable, that is distanced from us? It feels really exclusive. And the important thing to remember is that the economy is affecting us constantly, but we are affecting the economy also. We are constantly shaping it. And we're doing that through the decisions and choices we make on a daily basis. Did you go and buy a coffee this morning? Did you choose not to buy a coffee? Did you choose Noah, or did you choose Starbucks? All these tiny micro decisions and choices that we make day to day are affecting the economy. We are collectively creating the economy. A nice way, I think, of framing the economy for us non-economists is that we are balancing our needs, or more often for humans' wants, with the resources that we have available. And those resources are becoming much scarcer. And those resources could be a multitude of things. They could be time, money, energy. They could also be goods and services. And of course, they are natural resources. So just to give you a very brief overview of the economic system paradigm we are in today, our general system of economy is based off Adam Smith's 18th century classical economics, which is largely referred to as this invisible hand thing. Now, the central point of his invisible hand theory is that if the individual looks after themselves and serves themselves, the needs of society will be met automatically. So hence the invisible hand. So this is a really extractive system that prioritises growth, efficiency and profit. And this is still what this economy today is largely built on, although the neo-capitalism does recognise that we need a little bit more input from the state, and there are a scarcity for some people. But this is an 18th century model that we are still working on. This is the Hodgson era, and it only worked because of two main principles that it was based on. One, the markets are fair, and two, that resources were abundant. Now, today in our Anthropocene era, we now know that resources are finite, and our planet is reaching a point of absolute instability. So we have to question whether or not this is a model that is still working for us today.
So when the economy today is fit for purpose or a little bit broken, it's really important to have a thriving economy. And more so for us because we're on a small island. So there's a big wide world out there, and we need a strong economy to keep us robust and resilient to global shocks. We've got a small population, which means that per head our costs for healthcare, waste disposal and other services are higher. We inevitably need to import goods and food, and we need to be able to afford those imports. We need good jobs and innovation that comes with a thriving economy to keep our young people here and attract young people in an ageing population. It's really important. And for our current and incoming challenges to do with climate, a strong economy will help us to build resilience against that. But it's all a bit heavy for a Friday morning, so I thought maybe you could snuggle down and we'll tell you one of my favourite childhood stories, which is about two swindlers who came into town to meet the proud emperor, and they promised him that they would make him an outfit that was so fine that only the best people could see it. And you couldn't feel it on your body. And he was quite taken with this idea, so he paid a lot of money to have these clothes made for the coming procession. And his close advisors were quite worried because the swindlers had also rather cleverly said anybody who can't see it is hopelessly stupid and not fit for their job. And they didn't want to seem hopelessly stupid, or even worse, not fit for their important jobs. So they went along with the charade until the procession day came, and out the emperor walked with his little bottom jiggling in the breeze. And the people lining the streets didn't want to upset the emperor. They didn't want to appear hopelessly stupid. And they didn't want to appear unfit for their jobs. So they went along with the charade. Until we got to a young boy who had little ego and even less to lose. And he shouted, "But isn't he naked?" And with that, the bubble was burst. Now, what if we imagine that emperor was the modern economy of the global north, and the new clothes were the promise of endless growth without constraint? Because isn't it as ridiculous that endless growth can go hand in hand with ecological and social integrity, as it is to be wearing an outfit made of nothing at all?
Amazing. So we have this really complex challenge, and this complex challenge needs a new paradigm. And the challenges that we face today are very different to previous eras. They're much more abstract, they're less definable, they're more complex, sometimes kind of less visible as well, but perhaps more catastrophic as well. We look at things like climate change, biodiversity loss, the global displacement of people, which is increasing massively. What do we do? So you might have heard of this term, the polycrisis. This is where multiple interconnected crises converge and then they amplify each other. And it results in deeply complex challenges that are difficult to resolve. And again, there's no longer this one-size-fits-all solution that works for the challenges that we face today. So what other economic models exist that might be suitable for facing the polycrisis? And what happens when we apply the regenerative movement to our economy? And what is a regenerative economy? So you might have heard of regenerative agriculture before. That's something a lot of people are more familiar with. But what we're talking about goes far beyond the farming world. And in fact, it goes far beyond the world of sustainability as well. So to be regenerative is about creating systems that actively restore and renew our natural and social systems, which is really important. And it really puts the systemic nature of everything at the heart of all action as well. So this is a diagram from Daniel Christian Wall's book, Designing Regenerative Cultures. I've had the amazing privilege of working with Daniel before, but my favourite and I think the most simple definition of what regenerative means is from Janine Vigneres, who is the godmother of biomimicry. And she just says it's life and support of all life. And I love that, I think it's wonderful. So, how do we deal with the complexity of the challenges? Perhaps the polycrisis is asking us to think beyond this conventional problem-solving narrative and to create possibility making and find ways that can really help us to navigate complexity as well. So we need to build our capacity to vision the transformation change that I believe we deserve if we really want a thriving people and planet. And we need to do this collaboratively, and participatory design and decision making can be a really important part of this as well. So as an example, and some of you might well have seen this model before, this is a systemic framework known as the 3 horizons. So it's a futures and systems change framework for exploring transformation and how to bring it about. And it can be applied to any context or complex problem as well. So it's a really powerful way of engaging different perspectives to really map this landscape of change and innovation that we're part of. So it enables us to see the challenges of the present, which is the horizon 1, the red line there. The aspirations of the future, which is the green line going up there, horizon 3. And then finally, to the kind of a powerful way of engaging different understandings of this innovative space of transformation, or horizon 2, the blue one in the middle there. So unfortunately we don't have time to go into this in more depth, but it's the framework that we're using for this talk and so much of the work that we do as well. And literally last night I was doing the final edits to a chapter in a book that's going to be published next year with the co-founders of this process, so really excited about that coming out as well. But we're going to start with Horizon 1, which is the dominant system at present, or business as usual. And as the world changes, aspects of the system can start to feel out of place. So the cracks begin to show in the world around us. And as an example, from an economic perspective, as we've just been talking about extractive economic practices, these are no longer sustainable for people and planet. And this myth of growth for growth's sake, at what cost are we doing this? But we can't just necessarily burn it all down to the ground. This leads to collapse and slow recovery. And as you guys know, things can get nasty pretty quick when we don't have access to food or clean water or ways to support our families. So instead, we need transitions that are really rooted in challenging our current paradigm, but really embody transformation in a moral way with integrity.
So using the Horizon framework today, we have to acknowledge the situation we're in at the moment. So we have to acknowledge the economic system that I mentioned before that we're rooted in, and we have to acknowledge the polycrisis that Ali mentioned before. So the World Economic Forum very well illustrates this and shows the vast interconnectedness of the risks that we face globally and locally at the moment. And you can see that one problem in the environment also has a knock-on effect to the economy. For instance, if there is an ecological disaster, then migration changes, which affects the economy, and then that affects the geopolitical landscape, which then circles back to affect the environment yet again. And those interconnectedness of the systems really amplify pressures, causing a bit of a chain effect or domino effect. And that's what we're going to do to now focus on. We are going to exemplify this collectively because, as we mentioned before, we love collaboration, participatory research, and a little bit of playfulness. So we're going to create our own polycrisis flash web right now together. So I'm hoping you'll get involved. So I'm going to give you a single word prompt in a minute, and then I'd like anybody in the audience to shout out the first word that you think of when I shout that word out, and so on and so on and so on. So we create a live web. Anything that pops into your mind is absolutely fine, and I'll try and find a suitable end for it. Does that all make sense? Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to start us off with a really simple word that you can start to associate with. Food.
Chocolate.
Hunger.
Hunger.
Family.
War. Migration. Genocide.
Let's end on that system, Wow, okay, that took a dark turn, but a very necessary turn, I think. So we can see, although we created this kind of linear chain, we started with food and we ended with genocide, there were very tangible connections between all of those. And I'd like to pose to you now, again, shout out if you can think of anything. Can anybody link the idea of genocide back to our original prompt of food?
Competing for resources.
Absolutely, fantastic. Okay, so yeah, genocide creates this lack of scarcity, lack of resources, this desperation that people need to actually just fulfill their everyday needs. Absolutely. So this really nicely exemplifies, in quite a dark, horrible fashion, unfortunately, that one system cannot exist on its own. It has this knock-on effect, and then it often circles back to close the loop, amplifying the original problem. And this is something that really shows us how we need to take on systemic change to create a more resilient and just world, basically. We can also use that and reframe it in a slightly more positive way, though. So if we talk about making systemic regenerative change, those actions can also circle back and amplify that positivity as well. So it's important to see the flip side and the positive aspects of this. So that brings us on to Horizon 3, talking about positivity and regenerative action. So Horizon 3 is our visionary ideal world that we look towards. So the future that we want to live in that is rooted in deep sustainability, equity, and a just planet for all of nature. So this really requires a lot of vision, a lot of imagination, and is the ideal long-term successor to our Horizon 1 business as usual. Now, what's brilliant is we can find pockets of this ideal Horizon 3 in the future, in the present. So it's brilliant to find those little pockets of it everywhere to build on. But visioning is a really important practice to envelop in Horizon 3. So visioning allows us to move forwards from our everyday reality to vision and imagine something beyond, something different, something greater, something more equitable for everybody. And imagination is absolutely key in this. We need to put ourselves into a position where we don't have to be rooted in the practicalities of today, where we don't feel judged and we're able to come up with solutions collectively and excitingly. So this is a really exciting space. And if we talk about science, because yes, it has been proven that at least divergent thinking in terms of creativity and imagination creates incredible things and opens up people's minds to possibilities they didn't think existed beforehand. So it's a really important space for the reimagining of the future to allow that to thrive. And it's not it's not a new concept. Even Albert Einstein considered that imagination was more important than knowledge, because it is limitless.
So what if our economy was a bit more turkey? So at this point you might be wondering, what do turkeys have to do with imagination? Why is there a picture of a plasticine turkey on the screen and a talk about economics? Why are you even here, perhaps? But let me explain the origin story of turkey economics. And also, thanks to the creative prompt cards last night, I actually shared the story with Alta Cannon last night as well, so you can see what happens. But once upon a time, a few months ago, we ran a participatory event at an international conference called TCX Organising for Transformation. It's organised by the Transformations Community, which is a really fantastic global network of change makers, and our trip was kindly supported by the Isle of Man Arts Council. But we really wanted to demonstrate the power of creativity in developing creative possibility making in the face of the polycrisis. So we used systemic tools such as world system mapping and 3 horizons to kind of underpin the design of the workshop that we did. We have an amazing, diverse group of people from all around the world, and we sort of put them in different teams to represent different aspects of the human and ecological system that we're part of. And then we set them all kinds of different creative challenges using different materials. So the turkey was made from a woman from Canada called Dimitra, and she was part of a team that was representing the reimagining of wealth and economics in the future. What would the highest vision of that be? So she explained the story of Turkey to us. So to the First Nations people in Canada, the turkey has a really powerful symbolism. So it's known as the giveaway eagle, which I think is beautiful. So turkeys are the eagles that were enlightened enough to give up their amazing status as the really cool eagles flying in the sky, and sacrifice that to become turkeys on the ground, and really in service of life and sustaining all of life. And obviously, you know, turkeys aren't perhaps the most glamorous of animals, but you know, they're easy to catch, they have a lot of meat, you can feed a whole family with a turkey. So from this indigenous wisdom perspective, the turkey then becomes this remedy or this symbol for the antidote to the darker side of our modern capitalist paradigm. It really represents generosity, abundance, self-sacrifice, and the good of the whole. So what if our economy was just a little bit more turkey? So what followed was this kind of amazing discussion of kind of multidisciplinary, multicultural people discussing this and what the highest vision of our global economy could be based on the medicine or the wisdom of the turkey. And it was an incredible discussion. And for the record, we did have economists in the room, but we also had lots of other people. We had artists, we had academics, we had people working in humanitarian aid all around the world. So it was a really fantastic multidisciplinary experience. And hopefully this story really illustrates the power of creativity and play and facilitation, and the power of bringing people together to create possibility, to listen to and hear marginalised voices, to shift perspectives. And we as a collective really strongly believe that we need more discussions like this in our communities, in our governments, in our schools, in our places of work, that we need to bring people together and find ways to facilitate and really bring out the collective wisdom of what we all have to offer.
So Turkey Economics was a beautiful demonstration of harnessing and listening to marginalised voices. We're now going to go one step further and harness those marginalised voices in the form of habitats and species ourselves. Yes, this is another interactive element. You have been warned. So what we're going to do is try and harness this idea of more human thinking. So anyone who was here last night at the Fantastic Cat Workshop will be a little bit familiar with this process. But take a second, you should all have a card on your seat. If you don't, then we've got some here.
Anyone need a card?
Okay, so on one side of this card, you will have a habitat or a species and a little bit of a tiny bit of information about them. What I'd like to do in a minute is turn to the person or people closest to you physically and put yourself in the shoes of that habitat or species. And I'd like you to discuss between you and bring to the table one thing that you need as that habitat or species from our biosphere to thrive, and one thing that you can give back to support our biosphere. Now, you can be as imaginative as you like, you can be as literal as you like, and if you need a little bit of help or encouragement, there are a couple of suggestions down at the bottom of the card. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to read your card and talk to the people nearest with you, and see if you can start a conversation around one thing that you need to thrive and one thing that you can give back to support our biosphere.
This one.
Okay, smiles and an interesting conversation. So thank you for stepping into the position of nature and our planet. This brings us on to Horizon 2, because the activity we just did now is a classic example of a Horizon 2 activity. So the way I like to think about Horizon 2 is if Horizon 1 is our everyday business as usual today, and Horizon 3 is our aspirational future, Horizon 2 is the bridge between the two. So we try and find those points of excitement and regeneration and aspiration in Horizon 3, but we try and root them a little bit in what we know and our business as usual. So what you were just doing there was a perfect example of that. So this is a space of creativity, but it's also a messy space, full of imperfection. And it starts to talk about the transition between the two phases. Now, it's important to note that this Horizon 2 space is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we can start to see prototypes and examples of what that Horizon 3 world could look like. But it's also important to note that sometimes ideas that you can harness for Horizon 3 can be used just to perpetuate the business as usual everyday H1 system.
So we thought we'd ground it in reality a little bit and have a look at a few case studies of places that are starting to do things a little bit differently to get towards that vision. So the first one is an example of donut economics, which you might know the model very briefly. It's Kate Rowell's model, proposing that there's literally a sweet spot, a band in which humanity can exist with humanity's needs met without overshooting the resources available in nature. So Amsterdam was the first city in the world to adopt this model as a framework to help their decision making for the city, and they did that back in 2020. And it was very far reaching in terms of its impact, so touching everything from building and the development of new green building materials to setting up repair cafes to creating zero waste supermarkets. And the timing was important, so COVID was viewed as a disruptive opportunity to do things differently, with the vision to create a city that was regenerative and inclusive by design. So rather than falling back on austerity with a view to getting back into economic growth, it was a chance to do things a little bit differently. And they partnered with the Donut Economics Lab for the methodology and to support the transition. So in this case, the vision was this regenerative, inclusive city by design, and the tool that they used was the methodology of the donut economics model. And then coming a bit closer to home, we've got Scotland. So just last year, they passed their Circular Economy Act. So that was legislation that helped move away from the resource use of use and dispose towards use and reuse. So the fact that this was passed in law created a bit more of a level playing field for industry, so it meant that everybody had to do it. It was no longer just a voluntary practice, but also importantly, government freed up some funds to support the innovation that was needed to meet these new requirements. So as well as it being pitched as an environmental necessity, it was pitched as an opportunity for new jobs, innovation and resilience. So in this case, the vision was a different way of using resources, a more sustainable way of using resources, and the tool that was used was legislation that gave it that sticking power across different political decision makers. And then sort of going a bit further afield, but hopefully still relevant, so in the Seychelles we've got one of the more pioneering examples of green finance. So back in 2016, there was over $21 million worth of debt was repackaged into to enable nature conservation. And in the sort of nearly 10 years since that, it means that 30% of the marine territory of the Seychelles is now protected, and that's up from sort of zero when the deal was first done. A big part of this was costing up the ecosystem services, so what nature's providing in the Seychelles. It was calculated that an intact and thriving marine environment could store 24 times the carbon that the Seychelles was outputting, which releases an exciting prospect for carbon sequestration, income, and the ecosystem values were costed up. So the coral reefs and mangroves are estimated to provide $320 million per year in terms of climate defence, income from fisheries, and income from tourism. And I've put some links in, but I don't think you've got slides, so if you want the slides, get in touch and I'll send it. But it's just a little 4-minute video that explains this case study really well. And one of the strong messages that come through is how important it was to involve community. So a lot of this money was put in the hands of the local community so that they could make decisions for themselves and their environment. When we're talking about green finance, we just want to put the hazard warning lights on just for a moment. So Horizon 1 can do, so the business as usual, the dominant system, can do a sneaky thing where it sees Horizon 2 in action and it grabs it to make itself stronger. And I think we can see how green finance in neoliberal capitalism could be grabbed down into Horizon 1 rather than allowing it to be a transition to Horizon 3. And I'm a student with the Centre for Alternative Technology who are here today, and we heard from last night. And I've spent a lot of time with this diagram over the last 3 years. So this is called an iceberg model, and it's inspired by the work of Danella Meadows, who was a leading and influential systems change thinker. And very briefly, the idea is that the further that you get down this iceberg, the more likely that you are to make a lasting and meaningful change. And right at the bottom of the iceberg, we've got meaning, mental models, the values and beliefs that underpin the systems that we're trying to change. And so you can see that if we only continue to value nature in dollars, we're not going to get down to the bottom of that iceberg, which will create real systemic change. However, it's really powerful. What's happening up at the top is important too. We're in an emergency situation, and green finance is a way to unlock funds fast for things that need to be done quickly. So we're really into it, but with the caveat, integrity, caution, community involvement are all really important parts of any green finance planning.
So why are we talking to you about all this? We've already mentioned we're not economists, so why are we talking to you about the economy? So between us all, we've got 60 years of cross-sector experience, everywhere from corporates to conservation to education and everywhere in between. But the thing that has linked us more recently is that the complex world of systems change and regeneration is the only thing that makes sense to us personally at the moment. So we've come together to build Neon Futures in response to this urgent need for regenerative and systemic change. So seeing as we've been talking through this whole framework of the talk in terms of Horizon 1, 3, 2, we're going to do something a little bit different and introduce ourselves near the end of the talk. So we are collectively Alec Hodgson, who is a fantastic award-winning regenerative designer, facilitator and creative producer. We are Lucy Chapman, who, as we mentioned, is currently studying at the Centre for Alternative Technology and is a regenerative facilitator and community-led systems changemaker. And me, I'm a creative strategist, I'm Charlotte, education and engagement specialist, and multidisciplinary designer and social entrepreneur. So between us, we've got overlaps, but we do span a lot of different sectors and experience. So our mission as Neon Futures really is to create and support the reimagining of a future through the lens of regeneration with using creativity and collective intelligence. So we've mentioned collaboration a lot, and we've also considered some of the playfulness and creativity that we so value in this process. So we work with a multitude of people from corporate organisations to community groups, because this is a collective problem that we're all facing and tackling at the moment. And we're really looking at co-designing pathways to create a more just, resilient and life-sustaining world. And some of the tools we use, we've mentioned today or hinted at, and we're not going to go into any of them in details, but the things that really ground us in the work that we do are futures and systems thinking with a design thinking background, participatory research, collaboration is key as we keep saying, and harnessing the wisdom of living systems. So making sure that we de-center the human condition at points and consider every part of the natural world. And we also like to include a little element of playfulness in terms of storytelling and gamification to really harness that creativity that allows us to get to our Horizon 3 aspirational futures and have a little bit of fun on the way, and just hopefully helping to lead people to think a tiny bit differently.
So as a case study to illustrate what Charlotte's just been talking about, the Reimagining our Biosphere project. So I started this during my year-long position as the Biosphere artist in residence, which was a kind of year-long residency program in partnership with UNESCO Isle of Man and Manx Wildlife Trust, and supported by the Isle of Man Arts Council. And I created, oh, it's gone, there we go. I created a game that's based on something called World System Mapping. And it's a framework for taking into account the whole human and ecological system. And I turned it into a collaborative game for integrating whole systems thinking with different groups of people. So since its launch in 2024, I've worked since then with both Lucy and Charlotte on it. It's won the Biosphere Award for Engagement. We've worked with multiple organisations to customise it and use it in different ways. So Net Zero Isle of Man, Biosphere Isle of Man, and then further afield, the Centre for Research on Patagonian Ecosystems in South America. And it's now been played with over 3,500 adults and children on the Isle of Man alone, and actually that number's probably a lot more now. But for example, with Net Zero, we've taken it into most schools on the island now to explore possible future careers in a low carbon economy. We've had some amazing outputs with that as well, which is really exciting. But unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that more, but if any of you guys are interested in this project or want to know more, then do come have a chat with us after as well. And then just very quickly, a few samples of clients and collaborators that we've worked with on systems change projects. So on the Isle of Man, again, Net Zero Isle of Man, Biosphere Isle of Man. In the UK, people like the International Futures Forum and the Helen Hamlin Research Centre. And then further afield internationally, people like the World Fair Trade Organisation, and Enable Foundation in Hong Kong. So we're really interested in working with forward-thinking organisations anywhere in the world.
So this isn't a new conversation, and we've had some mentoring from people who've been doing this sort of in the field of economics and social justice for a lot longer than we have. But it is a relevant one, and it is an urgent one. And it feels intangible. Sometimes it feels like we can't impact changes, and it's something that's beyond all of our control, something that's just running itself. But we hope that what we leave you with today is a little bit of hope in the work that we're doing, that with the right tools and processes and collaboration and kindness towards each other, that no problem's too wicked or too complicated to tackle together. So we are all part of the economy. We impact it, it impacts us. It's everybody's business. So to go back to our story at the beginning, let's support each other, and let's never be afraid to be like that young boy and shout out when we see an inconvenient truth laid bare before us. So in the couple of minutes that we've got left, a final little activity for you is we have got the QR code on the screen, which you can scan with your phone. If it works, you might need to log on to the guest Wi-Fi. And just a question that we're posing to you, just to ground this into action. So name one small action or idea that you'd like to see take root on the island to grow a regenerative economy for future generations. And you can just think of that yourselves, or if you want to fill this in as part of our launch, the official launch of NEON in 2026, in early 2026, we're going to be offering a free 2-hour taster workshop of our work. So we'll pick a name at random who's filled in the form, and if you win that, you could use it for your own organisation, for yourself, for your family, or you could gift it to a community group or a charity that you think could benefit from it. So if you want to take part with that, just leave us your information. So we'll do that for 2 minutes. Talk while you're doing it if you want, ask us questions. We've just got a few minutes left. If anybody, have we got any paper copies? No, that's fine.
Just out of interest, has anything sprung to anybody's mind about one small action or idea that you'd like to see take roots on the island?
Yes, very much.
Yes.
Societal cooperative engagement.
Yes.
And capital engagement for businesses.
Fantastic. Yes.
That's a big one.
It is a big one, but a really important one that we need to see much more urgently. Yes.
The lucky ones of us that have planning pensions and have investments, the whole issue, of course, is that we're looking for return on investment. And the global stock market is not the place that does what you're suggesting here. How are we going to get around that? That basically, everybody's looking for return on their money, and very rarely do they think where that investment is going.
Absolutely, yeah. So if we can encourage people to change their mindset a little bit, engage in this conversation, I think that's a hugely, hugely powerful thing.
Yeah, are you talking about people wanting their pension pot to stay strong, or people having more agency around
People
asking
that like to
questions
lose
about-
money, they don't want to, you know, if they're thinking of their future or even for their children, everybody in the world that has money is investing in a system that actually is against what you're suggesting.
Well, I think what's in the news at the moment, some of the investments that we have relied on historically with this model of abundant resource and stable climate is no longer fit for purpose. So those investments that we believe are sound because they're based on that old paradigm, like those cracks that we're talking about, they're now starting to show. So and investment and insurance companies are recognising that, and some of them are at the forefront of climate mitigation.
Not to have a look at oil and gas shares, and we'll see that that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, I was researching something that talks about ask questions about what your money's doing while you're asleep at night, and that comes back to our individual. If we ask when we are setting our pension funds, when we're sitting with financial advisors, if we're asking what are your green funds, and be prepared to navigate shorter term shocks for longer term return. But it is that is we didn't mention it, but these are the clashes that come up in these conversations, and actually when it is people's retirement, people's pensions that people have been working for, people's security, it does raise quite emotive feelings. So it's important to have these discussions and use these tools to take the kind of personal clashing out of it and allow us to have conversations.
I think that's where the creative possibility making comes strongly as well, is what creative opportunities are there within that actually.
So before we wrap up,
Yes, please.
we'd just like to leave you with one quote that we really love. The future is not some place that we're going, but one that we are creating. We'd love to create that future together with you guys. Let's talk if any of this resonates with you. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate your time and interactivity.